Okay, thank you. Uh, Jason, you're absolutely right. When you're talking about this being one of our most common types of injuries, we do see a lot of injuries from strain, and they happen in a wide variety of ways. Unlike some injuries where we may look at it, if it's a motor vehicle accident or something like that, the cause is generally fairly narrow. But with strains, we can see injuries from slip and falls, from lifting and carrying things, from doing a lot of hand work, and there's a lot of different parts of the body that can be injured from a strain. As I look at the kinds of cases that we've had so far in 2021, if we exclude strains that are a result from slip, trips, and falls, for example, we still have about 28% of all the work comp incidents that we've had reported to us this year are from strains. And those strains can be, I said, from lifting and carrying, which is the most common one. 33% of our strain injuries are from lifting and carrying. 23% of them are from twisting. 13% are from pushing and pulling. 12 happen while walking or running. And a lot of these happen on uneven surfaces. So, a good thing to think about there is, knowing the surface that you're walking on, being aware if there's a hole or something unexpected on your walking surface, but that's a fairly common one. And another 10% of our strains come from jumping down, which kind of makes me think back to a prior safety moment we just did recently on the 3 points of contact, the importance of supporting yourself as you climb down off of something, whether that's a piece of equipment or a ladder. It's very important that, we don't cut that corner and jump off the back of a trailer, for example. We need to make sure we lower ourselves down evenly. And there's another 9% or so of these strain injuries that are just from miscellaneous causes. But I'd like to take a few minutes and talk about these biggies here. Lifting and twisting, pushing, pulling, are the majority of these strain injuries. So let's talk about how do these happen and what can we do to prevent them. Factors that come into play is the fitness level of the person who's doing the work, who may be injured. Obviously, if you're doing work that you're not physically in shape for, you're much more likely to get hurt and to have a strain. Strains can be from an injury to a muscle, or they could also be an injury to a tendon. Sometimes we're looking at, with spinal injuries, some sort of damage that is occurring with a disc too, where there can be some inflammation or herniation of a disc that can cause problems. We also are looking at, in addition to that fitness level of the employee, we're looking at the physical preparedness to work. You could be in good shape and physically capable of the work, but if you're jumping into the work cold, you're much more likely to have an injury, while you're hitting that job cold. There's also cumulative damage that happens. Lots of times over many years, we are doing things in a way that just kind of wear our body down a little bit at a time. When I've taught this class in person, often I can ask for a show of hands. I guess we could do that too. There's a little box at the bottom of the screen where you can raise your hand. But, I'd say, how many of you just have some sort of ache and pain that's common to you, that you experience, if not daily, on a very regular basis? And those kinds of chronic, discomfort that we feel are indicative often of cumulative wear and tear on our body that we need to pay attention to. Sometimes injuries just happen all of a sudden. Very rarely do they just, build and build and build from that kind of nagging discomfort to something really severe in kind of a steady way. Usually we have this nagging discomfort for a long time, and then all of a sudden there's the straw that breaks the camel's back, and boom, you have this, what feels like an acute incident, but often it is the result of a lot of activity over the past weeks, months, or even years. Sometimes the injuries, though, can be acute, where if we just do too much all at once, regardless of whether there's any cumulative damage there, where we just all of a sudden hurt ourselves. And we need to be thinking about, how do we protect ourselves? How do we listen to our bodies to make sure that we understand what our bodies are telling us? There's 4 stages of an injury, especially when we're talking about these kind of musculoskeletal injuries. First is fatigue. If your muscles are really tired, that's a warning sign. And sometimes that may manifest itself with just feeling a little bit weaker because you've been using the muscles so much. Sometimes it could be actually feeling some twinges or twitches or even cramping in your muscles. And those are all signs that something worse could happen if we don't, back off and give our body a bit of a break. Discomfort is another thing. I mentioned, if you have a nagging, ongoing kind of chronic pain. For me, for years and years, it was my lower back, and then it was my neck. And you just kind of learn to live with it after a while, and you don't think much about it. But if you do have an ongoing discomfort, you need to think about that. Your body, anytime you're in pain or discomfort, is telling you something's going on. A few months ago, back in January, I had another cervical operation surgery for a genetic issue, not like a work comp injury, but I was visiting with my surgeon on a post-operative follow-up, and he was asking me about my pain level, and I made some comment about, well, it's normal. In other words, it wasn't extreme and where I couldn't stand it. It was just kind of what I had accepted as normal. And he goes, oh, so what do you mean normal? And I described the pain. He says, well, that's not normal. Any pain at all, is not normal. Normal is no pain. Okay. And, for me, for most of my adult life, I probably wouldn't have recognized no pain as being normal. And I think a lot of you out there are probably kind of in that same boat. And so I would, first of all, encourage you that if you do have, ongoing discomfort or pain, associated with joints or your back or, anything like that, you should go and visit with your doctor, and he can help you identify exactly what has been causing, what kind of activities have been, contributing to, this injury over time. Pain is very important. Make sure you listen to your pain. So you can go from fatigue to discomfort to just out and out pain as it progresses. And when you get beyond that, the next thing that happens often with these musculoskeletal injuries, especially if it's something that's coming from your spine, is disability, where you can actually have neurologically induced, weakness of your muscles or the inability to use a muscle at all. And you definitely don't want to get to that point, especially if you're talking about, a herniated disc or some damage to a disc where nerves are having pressure on them, because that nerve damage can become permanent. And we definitely, none of us want to have any kind of permanent disability or permanent injury. Stressors that can contribute to these musculoskeletal type injuries is the amount of force that we're putting on our skeletal system, how much weight we're picking up or pushing or pulling, or twisting with. And so the amount of force and the repetition, and it doesn't have to be a lot of weight with a lot of repetition. We can have a low repetition with a lot of weight that can cause an injury, or we can have a very light amount of weight that we're bearing with high frequency, high repetition that will also result in an injury. So we want to be really careful with the amount of weight. In fact, every workplace, especially if you're doing any kind of physical labor, should be thinking about and define and identify what is the maximum amount of weight that one person should handle on their own. And I would recommend that that's somewhere between 50 and 70 pounds, probably. If you're, having to lift or move objects that weigh 50 to 70 pounds or more on a regular basis, there should be some looking at how we can better handle those heavy loads instead of lifting and picking those up frequently with our body. Also, awkward or static postures. So where you may need to stand in an uncomfortable way for a long time. And that could just be standing on a hard surface without being able to move for a long period of time. It could be something where you're required to, lean over to the side or forward a little bit for a long period of time while you're working on something or holding something, in an awkward position, or in where you can't move very much. And that's, you'll realize when you go to move again, it's really stiff and hurts at first until you get straightened up and move around a little bit. And that's a warning sign to you that you have been in a position that's difficult on your musculoskeletal system. Contact stress is another thing. Often this comes when we're holding or handling a tool in our hands or against our body, and vibrations from that equipment and how hard that equipment digs into our skin or against our joints or body can also result in some of these strains and musculoskeletal injuries. When we talk about these kind of injuries, your mom absolutely was right when she told you to stand up straight, and to have good posture. A lot of what we're talking about in preventing these types of injuries is how we hold ourselves while we're working, while we're lifting, while we're doing different kinds of jobs or using different kinds of tools. And so it's very important to make sure to try and keep your back up straight as much as possible, to keep your head above your shoulders and your shoulders back, having your head hanging forward and your shoulders hunched, rounded, and leaning from your lower back, are all ways that can get your spine's natural curve out of its comfort zone, where we're putting undue stress on the discs and on the muscles and tendons. Make sure that you have even loads, that you're working from the right and the left side, and as much as possible, keeping that weight that we may be bearing even on the right and left side at the same time. And if we can't, we should try and mix it up. So we go to the right and to the left side, when we're having to do different kinds of repetitive tasks, for example. Your spine has this natural curve in it. It curves, outward at the top and inward in the chest area, in the thoracic area, and then it curves outward again in the lumbar area. And this is part of our design to help our spine carry the weight that it does. And if we are maintaining or working in postures that put our spine out of that neutral position, it will cause a lot more stress to the muscles, tendons, and to the spinal discs. And so it really requires that we think carefully about how we are positioning and holding our body while we're doing our various jobs. Your back, when you're lifting things, is kind of like a lever, and a lever works with a fulcrum. So we use the principles of leverage, where you have a fulcrum point where that lever is pivoting over one point to help lift weight. And for us, when we're lifting with our back, that is our lower back. It's right down by our hips is where that fulcrum is. And if we're lifting with our arms, we're putting all the weight at the top of the lever, which magnifies the force on our lower back when we pick things up with our back. And so it becomes really important to limit that pressure, that force we put on our back. This drawing here indicates how when you lift with your arms while bending at the waist, it increases the force on your lower back by a factor of 10. And if you include the weight of your torso in with the weight of what you're lifting, then we can see situations where you're putting 1,000, 1,500 or more pounds of pressure on your lower back. And if you're doing that repetitively, once can be enough for a severe injury, but doing that repetitively is going to be a lot of wear on your back. Much better to wear out a tool than to wear out your body. So we really want to think about using our body appropriately and using the right tool when we can use some equipment or other assist, rather than always using our body for the lifting, pushing, and pulling. We're probably all familiar with good lifting techniques where you get a good grip on the package, so that it's not going to slip or shift while you're holding it. Keep it close to your body to limit and minimize that leverage force on your spine. The farther away from your body that you hold something or pull on something, it's going to put more pressure down your spine as you do that. So keep it close. bend your knees, not your back, so that you're lifting with your legs and you're trying to keep your back upright as much as possible and keeping your head up as much as possible too. You can also do something that's called building a bridge if you do have to bend down, which might be putting your hand out to put your hand on a bench or some other object while you're bending over to pick something up with the other hand. That bridging can help you distribute that weight across your spine instead of it all coming right down to your lower back. And that's a good technique that can be used as well. Getting help if you need it is very important. Team lifts are good, but first time I, really injured my back badly, I was doing a team lift. And it's important not only that you get help to do the lift, but that you still lift properly and remember some of the points we're going to be talking about here this morning. So when you're doing a team lift, make sure you're communicating well with your partner so that you're lifting together at the same time and so that your direction is moving together. If you have one going one direction and another going another direction, it's pretty easy for that load to get, off center and difficult to handle. And so communicate well with your lifting partner. Maybe I designate one of you to be the leader so that the other follows the other's movements instead of both trying to go in different directions. But, obviously, if we need to do a team lift, we're talking about an awkwardly shaped object or something that's too heavy. And often I think a better solution to these situations would be, if possible, to find some sort of mechanical assist, whether that's a forklift or a pallet jack or some other kind of dolly to help us move this material on instead of repeatedly using our body to move these pieces of equipment. The natural posture that I mentioned with your spine is very important. And things that we do that get us out of that natural posture are like reaching. If we're reaching way up overhead for something, that puts a lot more strain on our back. If we're reaching far away to the back of a shelf or something to grab something, that puts a lot more strain on our back. So avoid reaching. Twisting also is not very good for your spine, especially when you put it under a load. That can just kind of, cause extra kind of grinding wear and tear on the discs in your back when you put a load on them, and then you put a little bit of rotation in there too, and that can be very damaging. And make sure and try to load evenly, so that you're able to carry the center of the load of the weight in the middle of your frame so that you're not putting uneven stress on your frame as well. Also, extreme ranges of motion can be very difficult. For example, if you have something that you have to twist with your wrist, where you're doing a twisting motion with your wrist, when you go from this extreme to this extreme of the twist of your wrist, you're much more likely to injure a muscle or a tendon in your arm, in your forearm, either on your elbow or in your wrist. And so with all of your body parts, avoid those extreme range of motions where you're reaching all the way, from one range of motion to the other range of motion. Let's try and keep it somewhere in between, in the middle. Your body will handle that much better. Avoid the twist. Let's nix the twist. When you're going to pick something up and you have to move it to somewhere in a different direction, first of all, let's get close to that object so that we're not reaching out maybe to the side, to pull it in. That kind of is going to induce a twisting a bit and put uneven pressure on your body. But then, so you want to approach it head on, straight, center, and get it close to you. Try not to reach for it. And then face your load. And as you need to change directions to deliver that load, to set it down somewhere else, change directions with your feet. Don't twist around at your waist, especially when you're carrying a load. The right tool for the job can make a huge difference. In this graphic, you can see how a different tool, whether it has a pistol grip or not, and depending on whether you are working on a vertical or horizontal surface, can make a big difference in the posture you need to maintain with your arm. And we want to, for example, with your wrist, tools that you're using with your arm, we want to try and always find a tool that will allow us to use that with our wrist straight rather than having to bend our wrist or lift our elbow. So the right tool for the job may be indicated by whether you're able to use it with your wrist in a near straight position with your elbows between a 90 to 120 degree angle, and where you can keep your elbows close into your side instead of up high in an awkward position. These are all things that can put extra strain on your spine as well as on the joints and muscles of that limb that you're using. Make sure you have a good firm stance and that you're not standing in an awkward or uneven position, because that will also create uneven pressure on your body that can result in injuries. We see a lot of pushing and pulling injuries. And so it's important to remember that if you've got to push and pull things, it's much better to push something rather than pull it. We're much more likely to get off balance or in an awkward position trying to pull something than when we push something. And if you're pushing items, again, face the load straight on, stand up straight, and push up high. We don't want to have to bend over to push on that object. Engage your core before you begin to push and pace yourself. If you're pushing an object and moving too fast, you may need to bring it to a stop. That can require a big exertion to bring it to a stop. And also, going too fast can be a stressor on our body as well. So be careful with those pushing and pulling. Tips for avoiding an injury, just in a quick review then, is your fitness level. And I didn't mention this before, but your hydration is also very important for your muscles. Often, if you're a little dehydrated, your muscles may start to cramp, and it's an indication that, we don't have optimal, blood flow and oxygen and everything that your muscles need, and that you're maybe overdoing it in addition. So good fitness and hydration are very important. Being prepared for the work that we're going to do by warming up and doing some stretching ahead of time can be very helpful in avoiding injuries. And then remember proper technique, which really kind of boils down to being able to maintain as good a posture as possible while you're doing that work, and avoid those stressors of excessive force, repetition, vibrations, awkward stances. That also is very important. Try and get the right tool for the job. If you find yourself in a lot of discomfort using a tool, then maybe we need to step back and figure out if there's a different tool or a different way to do this job. And most importantly, if you're feeling uncomfortable, say something. If you need help with something because it's awkward or heavy, ask for help. Lots of times we think we've got to do it all by ourselves, and that's just not the case. We need to get help, and when it's merited, and we need to make sure we communicate to our supervisors if we're feeling, like our body is telling us that we're overdoing it. Better now to address overdoing it while the injury, isn't acute yet. And talk to your doctor if you feel like you have any ongoing or chronic discomfort, so that he can help you figure out how to fully heal from whatever cumulative stress and damage that you're experiencing with your body. Any questions?
Folks, if you got any questions, please type those into the chat box right now, and we'll get Doug to answer those. This is your chance to stump Doug on a question. So type those into the chat box. Doug, as you're talking there, great presentation, by the way. I was thinking about tools, and sometimes we think of tools as being, big lift things that, are really expensive and all of that. But sometimes it's a simple tool that can prevent this type of injury. I was just thinking just the difference between a cardboard box that has handles on it versus one that doesn't have handles. And that can make a big difference for us as well. Any thoughts on tools?
Or a box with straps on it versus not? We want to be very careful, because it's really tempting to try and use those straps as a handle, and that can also result in injury as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Anyway, so I was just thinking about, tools don't have to be expensive. They don't have to be, engineering marvels or anything like that. They can be really simple, but they can allow us to do our job better and safer.
That's right. You want to identify the tools that will allow you to perform the job while minimizing, being in those awkward positions, where you're having to extend your arms, your elbows, or lean or put uneven weight on your feet. you kind of think about those things. How am I loading myself? How am I able to hold myself while I'm using this tool? And sometimes it can just be something as simple as a tool that has a different handle on it that's oriented in a different direction, or, something like that. But we really need to think about, we don't have to accept that the discomfort associated with using a certain tool is a must. There's a lot of different tools out there, and the right tool can help you use it with your body in a good ergonomic position where it's more of a natural position.
Okay. And Laura's got a great question here. Are there any workouts we should not be doing, like deadlifts?
Well, you need to, be very careful about staying within your capability. I mean, often we try to build up to, the ability to do heavy weights, or, an extreme duration over short periods of time. We kind of get a little impatient sometimes. Sometimes we get really competitive, trying to do as much as the next person, whether that's in the gym or at work, when you're next to somebody else at work, trying to do what they can do often can be too much for you. And it's very important that we build up our abilities over a period of time, and make sure that as we do that, that we're being mindful of using our body in appropriate forms. Again, posture is just so important, and not going beyond your abilities, building up your abilities, gradually over time.
Great. Looks like that's all the questions, but I'm gonna chime in on that one though. When we start talking workouts, particularly working with weights. So a lot of our members are in law enforcement or fire service, where part of their job is to stay physically fit, and they may be doing physical training on the clock. That's part of what they do. One of the things that I've seen many injuries come from are free weights. And if you have an opportunity to choose between using a machine and a free weight, I'm not saying free weights should be totally banned, but your chances of having an injury from a free weight are greater than those in using machine. If I'm doing a bench press, that's a lot riskier than doing that same motion on a machine, that if something doesn't feel right, I can just let go, and it's not going to be any risk to me. So I would look at that,
or get off balance, with
Yeah.
the free weights, especially with a long bar like that, where it could tip to one side and cause a lot more strain on one side than the other.
Yeah. Even dumbbells and things like that, just because there's a lot less control there and they can go many different directions, you can drop them on your toe for that matter. And so if you've got the option between a machine and free weights, I would go with the machine, just because it's more controlled. Anyway, that's my opinion inserted there. It looks like that's all the questions that we have today. Any final words, Doug?
Go out there, have a safe day, and listen to your body.